Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 255, The Mark II. Yesterday, and early this morning, the supervisory commander of the 6 office commanders, Chai Ho-sung, summoned Seop Chun and Mong Muyak from the Heaven and Earth Society separately before the training and secretly informed them about the incident that occurred last night. What happened? I called you because of an unfortunate accident. Last night, due to an unpleasant incident, your association's trainee Mok Jae-eun was attacked and killed while receiving treatment at the infirmary. What do you mean by that? Seop Chun and Mong Muyak couldn't hide their bewilderment at the sudden and thunderous news. Who was Mok Jae-eun? He was a monster who had surpassed the wall at a young age, not even an adult yet. Even though they found it strange that their monstrous lord had been injured and hospitalized in the infirmary, they couldn't understand what was going on at this moment. That can't be. Who would dare? Seop Chun. Calm down. Muyak, but are you going to be rude to the supervisors? I apologize. As he was a colleague from the same association, it's unbelievable news. At Mong Muyak's words, Chai Ho-sung spoke with regret. The detailed circumstances are under investigation, but the culprit seems to be a eunuch named Byum Jung from the Western Depot. It appears that he held a grudge and carried out this incident. Byum Jung. Upon hearing that name, Mong Muyak and Seop Chun recalled the eunuch from the Western Depot. They didn't know his exact name, but they remembered that his surname was definitely Byum. Then did he do this because of what happened back then? Unable to contain his anger, Seop Chun asked. Where is that eunuch bastard? I understand your feelings, but he is also dead. What? According to Chai Ho-sung of the 6 offices, that eunuch named Byum Jung was serving Prince Jeongjin, but not only did he commit such an act out of personal grudge, but he also targeted Prince Jeongjin, who was scolding him. So he was subdued and killed by the hands of the Western Depot's leader, Chief Eunuch Ho. Damn it. The two of them found the situation utterly absurd. They couldn't easily accept the fact that their monstrous lord had died in such a futile manner. No, it was hard to believe that he had been injured and hospitalized in the first place. So when they protested that something was strange from the beginning, Yucheon Ho So Yerin separately called them and bowed her head in apology. What happened is entirely my fault. It occurred because I couldn't properly subdue trainee Mok Jae-eun. According to her, there had been a misunderstanding last night, and she had confronted Mok Jae-eun. At those words, Seop Chun and Mong Muyak couldn't hide their astonishment. Their lord, Mok Jae-eun, was a master who had surpassed the wall. But if Mok Jae-eun was sent to the infirmary, it meant that she was an even greater master. The embroidered uniform guards 6 commanders is at that level? However, she said something incomprehensible to them. It's not that I defeated him and caused his injuries. What do you mean by that? Trainee Mok Jae-eun possessed an extraordinary talent that I had never seen before. In an instant he reached a realm beyond his grasp, and as he forcefully tried to assimilate that enlightenment, his body couldn't withstand it. What did that even mean? They found it difficult to comprehend what she was saying. What did it mean that he reached a realm beyond his grasp and his body couldn't withstand it? Anyway, what was certain was that the confrontation with So Yerin had caused Mok Jae-eun to be hospitalized in the infirmary, and the eunuch from the Western Depot named Byum Jung seemed to have taken advantage of that opportunity to take revenge. They couldn't hide their sense of futility at the incident where their chosen lord had lost his life in such a vain manner. However, even though their lord had died, they couldn't give up on their mission. Therefore, they had to overcome this sense of futility and resume their mission. You're doing a good job even without me. Am I, lord? Mong Muyak's eyes widened. This voice undoubtedly belonged to his lord, Mok Jae-eun. Does that mean he's alive? He had truly believed that Mok Jae-eun had died because they had even shown him the dismembered corpse. But hearing his voice like this, he couldn't help but be surprised. Tap 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 tap. Mok Jae-eun released the acupoints he had sealed on Mong Muyak. Originally, Mong Muyak was a man of few words, but as the mute acupoint was released, he asked Mok Jae-eun as if a floodgate had opened. What exactly happened? The embroidered uniform guards supervisors informed us that you were killed by the Western Depot's eunuch at the infirmary. They even showed us the dismembered corpse. Ah. Mong Muyak stopped speaking midway. That was because the dismembered corpse was in a state where it was difficult to recognize the form. At that time he had thought that the eunuch had committed such a horrific act out of a burning desire for revenge. Mong Muyak continued speaking in disbelief. Did you intentionally pretend to be killed? Yes. Then what about that face now? It's a human skin mask. At those words, Mong Muyak frowned as if he couldn't understand and asked. Did you separately request a skilled craftsman to make it? The human skin mask they had ordered was not this one. It was a human skin mask he had never seen before, so naturally Mong Muyak had questions. In response to that question, Mok Jiongun smiled and replied. No. This face belongs to the Western Depot's commander. What? What do you mean by that? Did you separately obtain a human skin mask of the Western Depot commander's face? I didn't obtain it separately. It's his actual face. At those words, Mong Muyak's expression instantly froze. For a moment he doubted his own ears. His actual face. What did that mean? Judging by the way he spoke, it sounded like he wasn't wearing a human skin mask made by copying the face, but rather he had peeled off the skin from the face and was wearing it. To the dumbfounded Mong Muyak, Mok Jiongun casually said, You're thinking correctly. I found it more efficient and convenient to use as a human skin mask this way. Mong Muyak genuinely felt shivers run down his spine. He was aware that his lord's way of thinking was completely different from ordinary people, but he never expected him to peel off the skin from a living person's face and wear it. Peeling off the skin from an actual person's face and wearing it as it is was something that most people might think of once but wouldn't do because it was so unsettling. But the fact that he could actually put it into practice was truly frightening. Meanwhile, Mok Jiongun said, Anyway, it wasn't intentional, but thanks to that eunuch Biam Jung targeting me, my movements have become much freer. Then what are you planning to do? A human skin mask was like a double-edged sword. Wasn't the Western Depot's commander someone who attended to Prince Jiongjin? If he had the face of a person who had frequent contact with others, no matter how good his acting skills were, the chances of being exposed would be extremely high. Now that I have more freedom of movement, I should gather information and explore various methods. Then you won't be going to the underground prison. I will go. But you are already officially considered dead. I can change to the face of someone who can enter the underground prison when necessary. Mong Muyak closed his mouth at Mok Jiongun's clear answer. However, there was one concern that he couldn't help but have. Using the human skin mask of a living person ultimately meant that the person had to be killed. But if incidents of disappearances or deaths continued to occur within the Imperial Palace because of that, the situation could gradually escalate. Thus, Mong Muyak cautiously expressed his opinion. My lord, if I may say so, changing faces. The moment I go down to the underground prison will be the last time. Obviously, if I change frequently, problems will arise, so don't worry too much. Fortunately, Mok Jiongun was aware of the concerns. Mok Jiongun grabbed Mong Muyak's hand, helped him up and said, Sip Chun doesn't know about this, so Mong Muyak, please inform him. Understood. Then please continue with the work. Swish. With those words, Mok Jiongun's figure vanished as if it had dispersed. Seeing this, Mong Muyak clicked his tongue and muttered. Of course. There was no way this monstrous person could have died in such a futile manner. Embroidered Uniform Guard's 6th Office of Selection. The 6th Office of Selection was an investigative agency, and its leader was the Pacification Commissioner So Yerin. And the position that assisted the leader of the 6th Office of Selection was a 1,000-man commander of the 6th Office of Selection, and none other than the masked Embroidered Uniform Guard Ma Are Hyan. It was late, but Ma Are Hyan was working. The Pacification Commissioner So Yerin was currently busy as she had been appointed as the deputy supervisor of the Embroidered Uniform Guard's selection, so Ma Are Hyan had to take responsibility for the current work, resulting in frequent all-nighters. Especially on this day, he had to stay behind and organize the incident records due to the events that had occurred at the Embroidered Uniform Guard's infirmary and Prince Jiongjin's palace, so it took even longer. Russell. While he was writing the records like that. Knock knock. Someone knocked on the office door. Ma Are Hyan stopped writing the records and raised his head. He hadn't sensed anyone approaching outside the office, so knocking on the door meant that the person could evade his senses. Is it the Pacification Commissioner? For a moment he thought it might be the Pacification Commissioner, but upon second thought it wasn't. If it were the pacification commissioner, she would have entered without bothering to knock since she was the leader of this place in the first place. Thus, Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan's eyes filled with vigilance as he rose from his seat. And while drawing internal energy he opened his mouth. "Who is it?" There was no response. Maare Hyan's eyes, visible through the gaps in his mask, sharpened. He couldn't sense any presence, but someone had knocked on the door. And there was no answer to his question. What was their intention? Just as he was about to slowly rise from his seat and assume a battle stance. Thud thud. The sound of footsteps walking from the corridor outside the office was heard. And the footsteps went back and forth around the surroundings a few times before finally approaching the front of the 6th Office of Selection's office. What's going on? There should be someone who had knocked on the door in front of the office. However, even though the footsteps of the person who had just appeared had reached the front of the office door, no conversation could be heard. Knock knock. The sound of knocking on the door was heard again. At this, Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan opened his mouth. "Who is it?" Just as his vigilance was at its peak, a voice came from outside. "Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan. He sent me." At those words Maare Hyan's eyes narrowed. Eventually Maare Hyan let out a soft sigh and said, "Come in." Creak. As the door opened, a middle-aged man with a short beard wearing a blue robe was revealed. Just by looking at the blue robe, one could tell that he was an embroidered uniform guard like Maare Hyan and held the position of Thousand Men Commander. The moment Maare Hyan saw him, he felt irritation rising within him. I told him not to send anyone to the 6th Office of Selection. He didn't expect his teacher and the person he referred to as he to boldly send someone even to the place where he was, knowing that he was absent due to the embroidered uniform guard selection. Or perhaps it was because he knew that he was away that he was committing such a brazen act. Meanwhile, the bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men Commander opened his mouth. "Even if it's a face you dislike, shouldn't you at least greet me? I was informed that we would only meet at the contact point or his residence, wasn't I? My, you're quite on edge." "Well, I understand that you're concerned about the eyes around you, but Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan, you're not in a position to be picky or choosy, are you?" With those words, the bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men Commander pointed his finger towards Maare Hyan's abdomen. The implication of this was simple. It was the goo poison. Grip. Although it was hidden behind the mask, Maare Hyan was gritting his teeth. If only he hadn't become addicted to the goo poison and gained a weakness, he wouldn't have to endure such humiliation. Maare Hyan barely suppressed his anger and said, "Close the door." Yes. Maintain that obedient attitude. Even if you have complaints, the one in need should act with good manners. Maare Hyan. Before he could finish his sentence. Thud. Ugh. Thump. The bearded Thousand Men Commander's eyes rolled back and he collapsed forward. Behind him stood a middle-aged eunuch in a red official robe, smiling. Maare Hyan couldn't hide his bewilderment at the sudden appearance of the eunuch. Lord Ho. The eunuch was none other than Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot. Why had the supervisor of the Western Depot suddenly appeared at the embroidered uniform guard's 6th Office of Selection? Moreover, what was this sudden action? Just as he was puzzled. I was going to wait for a moment, but there was no need to wait. Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan. At the unique voice and way of speaking coming from Eunuch Ho's mouth, Maare Hyan's pupils trembled. This voice is... Chapter 256, The Mark III. I was going to wait for a moment, but there was no need to wait. Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan. This voice is... The unique way of speaking and the familiar voice. The moment he heard it, Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan with piercing eyes immediately recognized whose voice it was. Could it be Mok Jae-un? Oh, you have a good memory for voices. Maare Hyan couldn't hide his surprise at the response he heard. The man with a smiling face that resembled the Western Depot's commander Eunuch Ho. It was none other than Mok Jae-un. So you were alive. As the investigative branch, the 6th Office of Selection, he had been unable to hide his dismay upon believing that Mok Jae-un had been killed. Since he had been attacked while in a critical condition after clashing with his teacher and the leader of the 6th Office of Selection, Pacification Commissioner So Yerin, he hadn't doubted that Mok Jae-un would naturally survive. but seeing him alive like this he couldn't help but be astonished. Ma Reihan's eyes narrowed through the gaps in his mask as he looked at the face wearing Mok Jae-un's human skin mask. Ha! What exactly is that face? Didn't you just call me eunuch Ho a moment ago? I did say that, but how did you get that face? Ma Reihan couldn't finish his sentence. The Western Depot's leader, Chief Eunuch Ho, was not only a eunuch with a high position but also a confidant of Prince Gyeongjin, one of the country's influential figures. Wearing the human skin mask of such a person and wandering around was extremely dangerous. If he were to be exposed, it could turn the imperial palace upside down. Are you worried that it might cause problems? Not just problems, but you know I still have something to receive from you, don't you? That's true. Ma Reihan had made a deal with Mok Jae-un. He agreed to provide information related to the underground prison and offer assistance when necessary. Of course, the price was the removal of the goo poison in his body. Let's just say there are some circumstances regarding this face. But don't worry, it won't cause any problems. Besides, from what I saw, it seemed like you were being blackmailed by the person here, weren't you? The person Mok Jae-un pointed at with his finger was the unconscious bearded embroidered uniform guard thousand-men commander. Mok Jae-un, who had been hiding his presence after coming to make a request and encountering this person, revealed himself upon learning that thousand-men commander Ma Reihan had goo poison in his stomach. Inwardly, Ma Reihan felt refreshed seeing him collapse, but he quickly concealed that emotion and said, "Even so, it was a rash action." Rash? What are you going to do about the aftermath when he wakes up? Are you worried about the aftermath? How could he not be worried? This person was a confidant of that person, and knew about the goo poison inside him. If this person were to wake up, his plan to pretend to obediently follow him while somehow seeking a reversal would obviously be disrupted. Thus Ma Reihan said to Mok Jae-un, "You might lose your life if you are suspected." Has it escalated to that extent? At Mok Jae-un's nonchalant words, Ma Reihan gritted his teeth. Was he acting recklessly because it wasn't his own matter? If the person behind this man had even the slightest suspicion and decided to eliminate him, they could activate the goo poison and kill him in an instant. I don't think you understand how serious this matter is. It must be serious for you. After all, you're in a situation where you can't do anything because of what's inside your stomach. Even though you know that. Calm down. More importantly, I came because I have an urgent matter to request from you. At Mok Jae-un's words, Ma Reihan looked at him with disbelieving eyes. Right now, the one in a hurry was actually himself. He had touched someone he shouldn't have and was now trying to resolve his own matter first. Thus, Ma Reihan lowered his voice and spoke, his mood turning unpleasant. You have the nerve to ask me to help you when my life is hanging by a thread. You seem quite anxious, don't you? Then keep your promise so that I won't be anxious. Ma Reihan stated what he wanted from Mok Jae-un. The only way to overcome the current situation was for Mok Jae-un to remove the goo poison in his stomach as promised. That's going to be difficult. What do you mean? I can't do that until my work is finished. If you, without your weakness, were to insist on fulfilling your duties as an embroidered uniform guard, it would hinder my work. Crunch. At Mok Jae-un's words, Ma Reihan gritted his teeth. From his perspective, it was definitely a valid point, but he was furious at this reality where everyone, no matter who they were, was trying to exploit his weakness. He wanted to overturn this situation whether he lived or died. Grip. Strength entered his fist. But the reality that he couldn't do so was frustrating. He hadn't repaid his debt of gratitude to his teacher, and he hadn't found that person either. Therefore, he had to endure with a heart of sleeping on brushwood and tasting gall. Seeing Ma Reihan barely suppressing his anger, Mok Jae-un chuckled. At this, Ma Reihan reacted irritably. Are you mocking me? No. You just seem very angry. Knowing that, are you provoking me on purpose? It's not on purpose. But if I'm going to make a request, I suppose I should clean up the situation to some extent for you. What? What did that mean? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un bent down and rummaged through the body of the unconscious bearded thousand-men commander. Stop. What are you doing now? Are you trying to make the situation more complicated? Ma Reihan found it increasingly difficult to contain his anger. He wasn't even going to remove the goo poison, yet he was trying to escalate the situation further. Meanwhile, Mok Jae-un, ignoring him, pulled out a book-sized wooden box from the bearded Thousand Men commander's pocket. Seeing this, Ma Are-hyun frowned. That was because this wooden box was none other than a storage case for human skin masks. The reason he knew this was that he had received this case containing special medicines from a craftsman. Mok Jae-un held it up and said, "This looks like a case for human skin masks, doesn't it?" "Why did he bring this?" Mok Jae-un opened the human skin mask case. Inside, a human skin mask submerged in medicine was revealed. But the moment he saw this face, Mok Jae-un's eyes flickered with surprise. That was because the face on the human skin mask was very familiar to him. It resembles the face of the Eastern Depot's junior eunuch Jang. Junior eunuch Jang, the eunuch of the Eastern Depot. He was a confidant of Imperial Consort Seo, serving her. Mok Jae-un tilted his head and then looked at Ma Are-hyun, saying, "Why does this person have the face, no, the human skin mask of junior eunuch Jang from the Eastern Depot?" At that question, Ma Are-hyun sighed and muttered, So he was planning to use me as well." "Pardon? That's the human skin mask I received from the craftsman." "You Thousand Men Commander Ma Are-hyun? It wasn't me who ordered it." Ma Are-hyun cautiously pointed at his own abdomen with his eyes. It was to convey the fact that the person who had implanted the goo poison in him had ordered the item. Of course, Mok Jae-un immediately understood. "I see. The person who implanted the goo poison in you was trying to do something with this. Seeing that this person brought it, it seems he intended to make me wear it." Ma Are-hyun instinctively sensed it. Otherwise, why would he bring back the human skin mask case that he had delivered? "Is that so? Can you also guess what he was trying to make you do after wearing the human skin mask?" "Well, I can roughly guess, but..." He could understand that it was to cause chaos. However, he couldn't know exactly how he intended to cause chaos. At Mok Jae-un's question, Ma Are-hyun shook his head. "I don't know the details either. If you hadn't knocked this person unconscious, I probably would have known the reason by now." "So it's my fault, you mean?" "In that case, there's no choice. Let's wake him up and ask him. What the hell was he talking about?" Waking this person up now would make the situation even more difficult to handle. Thus, Ma Are-hyun extended his hand to Mok Jae-un and said, "Stop it. You're not even going to help me, so why do you keep trying to escalate the situation?" "I'm not trying to escalate it. I'm trying to help you." "What?" "I said I'm trying to help you." At those words, Ma Are-hyun furrowed his brows. What was this sudden talk about? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un grabbed the inside of the unconscious bearded Thousand Men commander's collarbone and said, "It seems like you won't be able to properly carry out my request if you're being manipulated by these people. I have no other intentions, so just watch." Grip. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jae-un applied force to his fingers. At that moment, the unconscious bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander woke up due to the pain. Mok Jae-un covered his mouth with his other hand as he tried to scream. Then he smiled at the awakened bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander and said, "Are you awake?" At Mok Jae-un's greeting, the bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander's eyes widened. That was because Mok Jae-un's face currently resembled Eunuch Ho, the confidant of Prince Jeongjin and the supervisor of the Western Depot. Among the embroidered uniform guards, there was no one who didn't know this face. Eunuch Ho? How is he? The bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander showed an expression of incomprehension. Why was the eunuch from the Western Depot in the office of the embroidered uniform guard's 6th office of selection? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un continued. "I controlled the surrounding sounds with my true energy. I just covered your mouth because I didn't want to hear your screams. I'll take my hand off." Swish. As he removed his hand from the mouth, the bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander rolled his eyes and surveyed his surroundings. Then he spotted Thousand Men commander Ma Are-hyun behind Mok Jae-un. Seeing this, his eyes sharpened. "Thousand Men commander Ma Are-hyun, what's going on?" "Just in case I'm saying this, but to Lord Eunuch Ho." Slap. Before he could finish his sentence, the bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander's head turned to the side. The reason his head turned was simple. It was because Mok Jae-un had slapped him. The bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men commander slowly turned his head and opened his mouth with anger rising to the top of his head. Eunuch Ho. What is the meaning of this? How dare you be here? Slap. Before he could finish speaking, the bearded thousand-man commander's head turned to the side again as another slap flew in. It seemed like a simple slap, but his face hurt as if it was burning. The bearded thousand-man commander barely endured it and said, "Ha, Eunuch Ho. This is an act of overstepping your authority. I don't know why you and Eunuch from the Western Depot are here, but..." Slap. Once again the bearded thousand-man commander's face turned to the side. After receiving the third slap, not only did the bearded thousand-man commander's left cheek swell up, but blood vessels in his left eye burst, turning it red. At this, the bearded thousand-man commander abruptly turned his head and glared at Mok Jae-un. Then Mok Jae-un smiled and said, "You're a bit quieter now." At Mok Jae-un's words, the bearded thousand-man commander found it absurd. Did he slap him just to make him quiet? Even if he was the supervisor of the Western Depot, he couldn't humiliate and hit him, an embroidered uniform guard thousand-man commander from a different affiliation like this. However, then shall we have a little talk now? What's going on? The bearded thousand-man commander suddenly found it strange. That was because, although he had no reason to converse with Eunuch Ho, he had heard his voice a couple of times in passing since he was a confidant of Prince Gyeongjin. As an eunuch he had a quite shrill voice, but this voice was different. Could it be? The bearded thousand-man commander rolled his eyes and looked at the back of Mok Jae-un's hand. Seeing the back of his hand, the bearded thousand-man commander's eyes narrowed. As far as he knew, even though Eunuch Ho appeared to be middle-aged due to his profound internal energy and makeup, he was aware that he had reached the age of 60. At that age there should have been wrinkles on the back of his hand, but there were none at all. With this, the bearded thousand-man commander was certain. He's a fake. The person in front of him was definitely not Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot. Who are you? Slap. Before the question could be finished, the bearded thousand-man commander's head turned to the side. Not only did the slapped bearded thousand-man commander's cheek turn a bluish color, but blood also flowed from his mouth. Beyond the numbness caused by the pain in his cheek, his head was spinning. To him Mok Jae-un smiled and said, "Just answer the questions I ask." To the quieted man, Mok Jae-un held out the human skin mask case and said, "What were you trying to do with this?" Seeing the human skin mask case, the bearded thousand-man commander's eyes wavered. He didn't know the identity of this bastard, but one thing was certain. Something had gone wrong. Thus, the bearded thousand-man commander hurriedly racked his brain. What should he do to escape this situation? Then he glanced at Ma Ari-hyun, who was watching from behind Mok Jae-un as if observing. "I don't know the identity of this damn bastard, but he must be related to that son of a bitch Ma Ari-hyun. In that case..." The bearded thousand-man commander urgently shouted, "If you touch me, thousand-man commander Ma Ari-hyun will also die." He thought that the only answer was to recap the situation. Although Ma Ari-hyun wouldn't have disclosed the existence of the goo poison under a taboo, if it was certain that this man was helping Ma Ari-hyun, he would realize that he couldn't touch him recklessly. Slap. The bearded thousand-man commander's head turned to the side. Blood flowed from his reddened left eye as his head turned. His left eye was not visible. Moreover, a ringing sound of beep dash echoed in his left ear, and he seemed to have lost both his hearing and vision on one side. Amidst the pain, the bearded thousand-man commander, driven by spite, shouted, "No. It's fine even if that bastard Ma Ari-hyun dies. I don't know how someone without the goo of command in their body can threaten to kill thousand-man commander Ma Ari-hyun." At those words, the bearded thousand-man commander's right pupil trembled as if an earthquake had occurred. He knew about the existence of goo poison, so he was aware of what the goo of command was. The goo of command was the female goo that could control the parasitic goo poison as a pair. How the hell does this bastard know that? The bewildered bearded thousand-man commander looked at Ma Ari-hyun. Something had gone wrong. The bastard was definitely under a taboo, unable to disclose the existence of the goo poison through his own mouth or any other means. The moment he disclosed it, the goo poison would rampage and he would lose his life. But how did this person who had the face of Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot, know about that fact? Damn it! Realizing that something had gone wrong, the bearded thousand-man commander's breathing became rough. Grip. Watching him from behind Mok Jae-un, Ma Ari-hyun's clenched fist tightened. Due to the weakness of the goo poison, He had been unable to rebel and had to endure humiliation by doing as he was told. But seeing the bearded embroidered uniform guard in such a state, looking bewildered, he couldn't help but feel ecstatic regardless of the consequences. Chapter 257, The Mark IV. Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan's heart felt refreshed. At this moment he was filled with more ecstasy than anyone else. However, he soon returned to reality. It was because Mok Jaeongun, wearing the human skin mask of Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot, was pushing his opponent into a corner without leaving any room for escape, and he wondered how exactly he planned to handle the situation. If he pushes like this, that person behind this man might kill me with the goo poison. This was as clear as day. He wasn't even going to immediately remove the goo poison in his body, so what was he planning to do? As he was puzzled, Mok Jaeongun said, "If you don't want to lose your remaining eye and ear, you should start giving the answers I want." At Mok Jaeongun's words, the bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men Commander hesitated with trembling eyes. He couldn't tell if the person in front of him was the real supervisor of the Western Depot or not. However, one thing was certain: he was stronger than him and seemed to know a lot. What should I do? In fact, there was one predetermined guideline in this situation. Thousand Men Commander Wu. What should you do if you get caught in an unexpected situation? I won't create a situation for you to worry about. I'm much more tight-lipped than I look. Anyone can say that. But this old man wants something definite. What does Your Excellency want me to do? It's nothing much. I'd like you to always keep this between your teeth. What's that? The bearded embroidered uniform guard Thousand Men Commander had a small poison pill in his upper right molar. This poison pill contained a very small but vicious type of acid that could instantly burn the tongue, throat, and esophagus, and was strong enough to melt all the internal organs. It was safe to say that the moment it touched the tongue, one would lose their life before counting to 10. Tremble, tremble. The bearded Thousand Men Commander's hand trembled violently. He had to follow the guidelines, but how many people could end their own lives without hesitation? No matter how much training one received, it was bound to be frightening. Hugh. I have to do it. I must do it. Otherwise he would continue to be tortured by this person. Just as he was trying to control his mind as his breathing became increasingly rough. Your breathing is out of control, and your pupils keep trembling as if you're about to make an important decision. Moreover, in the midst of that, your tongue in your mouth keeps moving towards your upper left molar, enough to feel uncomfortable. What? At that moment, Mok Jaeongun brought his face close to his mouth. Then he sniffed and raised the corners of his mouth coldly. Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan, who was watching from behind, wondered why he was doing that, but to contain a strong acidic poison, you need an extremely tough stomach lining and special medicinal treatment. That smell is coming from your mouth. I've heard of the method of putting a poison pill between the teeth like that, but it's my first time seeing it. At those words, the bearded Thousand Men Commander's right eye widened. What the hell was this bastard? He was already filled with fear, unable to go through with it, but now that the existence of the poison pill had been discovered, he couldn't help but feel bewildered. Swish. At that moment, Thousand Men Commander Maare Hyan's figure blurred and suddenly appeared behind the bearded Thousand Men Commander. Thud. Ugh. The Maare Hyan who appeared behind him grabbed his cheeks with his hands, pulled his lower jaw and made him tilt his head back. Seeing his mouth forced open, Maare Hyan's eyes widened. There really was something that looked like a poison pill in his upper right molar. Meticulous. Maare Hyan inwardly clicked his tongue. He had thought this person was a close confidant of that person, but even such a person had taken measures to be killed or die at any time. As he was clicking his tongue like that, Maare Hyan tried to put his finger inside the mouth. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun stopped him. Don't. What? Just leave him be. Leave him be. What if he bites the poison pill and kills himself while doing that? Then they wouldn't be able to find out anything, and if he died here in the 6th Office of Selection, it would become even more difficult to handle the situation. However, Mok Jaeongun nonchalantly said, "If he does, then so be it." No. How can you say that? First, take your hands off. How can he speak if you're holding his jaw like that? At Mok Jaeongun's words, Maare Hyan's eyes showed that he couldn't understand at all. If he had a poison pill between his teeth, he would definitely kill himself. But Mok Jae-un's attitude was as if it didn't matter at all. He wanted to remove the poison pill right away, but Ma Arehayan eventually let go of his jaw and stepped back. The bearded thousand-men commander's mind became complicated as his jaw was open and drool was dripping. Inwardly, he had a strong desire for them to forcibly remove the poison pill. Damn it. Then at least he would have had the excuse that it wasn't his own will, but he felt even more regretful. However, apart from this, he felt a glimmer of hope. Since they had seen that he had a poison pill, he thought they wouldn't continue to torture him and strongly push him into a corner. Meanwhile, Mok Jae-un smiled and said, "Now bite the poison pill and die." What did you say? Instantly, the bearded thousand-men commander's expression froze. Wasn't that what you had in your mouth in case you needed to kill yourself? It was a valid point, but he was dumbfounded that his opponent was urging him to die without even extracting any information. Meanwhile, Mok Jae-un continued. Since someone with such strong determination that they even have a poison pill in their mouth won't answer my questions, I need to shorten the time. Hurry up and kill yourself. Huh. The bearded thousand-men commander was at a loss for words. This wasn't what he expected. It was going in a completely different direction than what he had anticipated. As he was feeling bewildered, Mok Jae-un, as if not minding it at all, whispered into his ear with a smiling face. If you kill yourself, I'll make one promise to you. If I find your relatives, blood kin, and those related to you, I'll send them to your side without leaving a single one behind. As soon as those words ended, the bearded thousand-men commander's face turned deathly pale. With the face of Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot, he was smiling as if he was excited just thinking about it, his mouth stretched to his ears, and he couldn't bear the goosebumps all over his body. A moment later, the bearded thousand-men commander was unconscious, and in Mok Jae-un's hand was the poison pill pouch that had been in his molar. Thousand-men commander Ma Arehayan, who was looking at this, inwardly clicked his tongue. As an investigative department, he had also interrogated opponents in numerous ways. But this bastard Mok Jae-un had driven his opponent to the edge of a cliff in a completely unexpected direction. It was as if he knew exactly what would make his opponent terrified. So thousand-men commander Ma Arehayan was to become the trigger for a conflict between the second prince and imperial consort Seo. Yes. The order the bearded thousand-men commander had received was that Ma Arehayan was to wear the human skin mask of junior eunuch Jang, an eunuch from the Eastern Depot who could be considered a close associate of imperial consort Seo, and target the life of the second prince, Prince Zhang. It wasn't to actually kill him but to trigger a war between them. With the goo poison in your stomach, it must be frustrating to just suffer. Just suffer. Isn't that so? At Mok Jae-un's words, Ma Arehayan snorted and went somewhere inside the office. Then he opened the door of a safe with his name on it and took something out. It was none other than another human skin mask case. Ma Arehayan opened its lid. Click. Oh ho. Seeing this, Mok Jae-un's eyes flickered with surprise. That was because inside was a face identical to the human skin mask the bearded embroidered uniform guard thousand-men commander had brought, the face of junior eunuch Jang, the eunuch from the Eastern Depot. You had your own plan. It's not the best plan, because it requires me to risk my life. Well, that's true. The additional human skin mask he had made would serve as another piece of evidence in case the person who had orchestrated this removed the human skin mask used in the incident. However, the moment he presented this as evidence, that person would end Ma Arehayan's life with the goo poison. In the end, the human skin mask Ma Arehayan had prepared was a move of mutual destruction. Ma Arehayan, who was looking at Mok Jae-un, cautiously opened his lips. If I didn't have a weakness, I could file a request for confinement to the 6th Office of Selection with just this person's status and the evidence. And I have no intention of interfering with your work or betraying you. If you tell me to sign and write a document, I can do it and even swear an oath. So you're asking me to remove the goo poison, right? Yes. But what should we do? I'm a bit timid and cautious. You. Ma Arehayan raised his voice but suppressed it. What did he mean by being timid? Wasn't it simply because he couldn't fully trust him? Ma Arehayan spoke to Mok Jae-un in a barely suppressed voice. Then what are you planning to do? Even if you continue to detain this person, his confidant, that person will become suspicious, and if you let him go, the result is obvious. Do you want me to die like this? How could that be? Then do you have any plan? You're asking as if I have a bundle of solutions. Ha. Ma Are Hyun let out a sigh. Since he was in a disadvantageous position, it was difficult for him to even get angry when Mok Jae-eun spoke like this. If it came to this, it might be better to engage in mutual destruction with the bastard before the situation became uncontrollable. Just as he was having such extreme thoughts, Mok Jae-eun suddenly got up from his seat and handed the poison pill he was holding to Ma Are Hyun. Why this? Keep it with you. I'm going so. Going? You're just going to leave after causing this mess. I never said I was just leaving. What? I'm going to meet the person who caused trouble for you and have a talk with him. At those words, Ma Are Hyun, who was about to grab Mok Jae-eun, hesitated. Sang Ik-seo, the 4th rank embroidered uniform guard associate military commissioner. If the 2 Northern and Southern pacification commissioners were the pinnacle in charge of the actual affairs of the embroidered uniform guards, above them were the associate military commissioner, deputy military commissioner and the military commissioner, who held command authority. Here Sang Ik-seo, who held the position of associate military commissioner, was the 3rd highest figure in the embroidered uniform guards and the very person who had implanted the parasitic goo poison into Ma Are Hyun's stomach. What the hell is this bastard thinking? He suddenly said he was going to meet Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo, so it was difficult to discern Mok Jae-eun's intentions. Thus he was about to ask the reason for it, but what are you going to do by meeting him? Swish. But before he could even ask, Mok Jae-eun's figure blurred and disappeared. Damn it. He was truly doing as he pleased. At this, Ma Are Hyun couldn't hide his predicament. It was clear that Mok Jae-eun wasn't just going to meet that person, but intended to do something. However, there was a huge problem here. Although he knew Mok Jae-eun's martial arts were exceptional, beside Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo was a master of unknown identity who had defeated him in just a few moves. Chapter 258, The Mark V. In an office at the main hall of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, a middle-aged man in his 50s with drooping eyes and a scruffy beard sat with his legs crossed on the desk, puffing on a short cigar pipe and exhaling smoke. Phew. His name was Sang Ik-seo. He was the Associate Military Commissioner of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, ranked 3rd in the chain of command of the organization as a 4th-rank official. In his office, there was another man in his 40s dressed in the uniform of a 100-man commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, diligently polishing his sword while sitting comfortably in a guest chair. Considering their difference in ranks, the 100-man commander should have been standing at attention, but his relaxed posture suggested their relationship was quite horizontal. Schwip. Each time the middle-aged man in his 40s wiped the sword, the surrounding air seemed to sharpen in a peculiar way. This alone was enough to tell that he was no ordinary person. After a while of quietly focusing on their respective tasks, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo, who had been smoking his pipe, spoke up. By now that guy should be entering the inner palace. To this, the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-man commander replied. If it's according to the set time, yes. Soon the inner palace, no, Prince Jong's Jikian Palace will be turned upside down. If it succeeds properly, it won't just be Jikian Palace. The entire Imperial Palace will be in an uproar. It was an incident targeting none other than the second prince, Prince Jong. If it were to happen, no matter how much the Emperor cherished Consort Seo, he wouldn't let this matter slide. It'll be very amusing. The established power dynamics would flip in an instant. Thinking about how that bitch would suffer made him unable to contain his inner excitement. Puffing on his cigar pipe and exhaling smoke, he spoke. Phew. But Wu Yun is late. 1,000-men Commander Wu Yun. He was the Embroidered Uniform Guard assisting him. By now he should have already relayed the order to that guy and returned. But he hadn't arrived yet. Finding this suspicious, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo said with a doubtful gaze. Don't tell me that guy defied the headquarters order? To this question, the middle-aged Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-men commander chuckled and replied. No matter how much those guys pretend to be righteous and noble, when it truly comes down to a life-or-death situation, they have no choice but to obey. No choice but to obey, huh? Well, with a bug holding their lifeline in their belly, refusing would mean they're crazy enough to want to die. The bug in the belly. What they were referring to was none other than the goo poison. Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio, who had been laughing like that, tapped the ashes from his cigar pipe into the ashtray and said, "Since we're on the topic, it's quite convenient, but do you think we could get a few more goo poisons? Or perhaps control more of the parasitic type through the command goo? I've told you before." "Told me what?" "The goo poison comes in pairs, so we can't increase the parasitic type that way. And to create a pair, it requires numerous poisons and training, so it can't be made just because you want it." Upon hearing this, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio licked his lips as if disappointed. There was this 1,000-man commander who, despite only being a 1,000-man commander, wore a mask and acted all high and mighty, which annoyed him. But thanks to the goo poison, he had transformed into an obedient slave. Then is it possible to recycle the ones inside? The ones inside? I'm talking about the parasitic type. After the host dies, it will also burst and die not long after. Of course, if we take action beforehand, recycling isn't impossible. Now that's good news. He had planned to use it a few more times after this incident before discarding it anyway. But if the goo poison could be recycled, he could create another set. It was truly priceless. Tell me when the time comes. Understood. By the way, is that matter of yours going well? What matter are you referring to? The interrogation of that monk. If you're personally going down to the underground prison once every 2 days to interrogate him, the item you're searching for must be quite important, no? Thud. As soon as he finished speaking, the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander stopped polishing his sword. He then placed the sword on the table. Upon seeing this, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio's eyes filled with tension. That was because the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander who had been at the table had suddenly disappeared. Schwip. Soon rough hands gripped both of his shoulders. Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio unconsciously gulped at the hands pressing down on his shoulders. Although he wasn't part of the field operatives, unlike the military commissioner or deputy military commissioner, he had once been a field operative and was a master at the early stage of the transcendent realm. Even he trembled at the overwhelming prowess of the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander, who had appeared behind him in the blink of an eye. Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio spoke in a tense voice. Hey, did I perhaps say something wrong? At that question, the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander, who had his hands on his shoulders, tightened his grip and spoke. Associate Military Commissioner, sir. What did I say was one of the conditions for helping with what you wanted? You said not to interfere with your affairs. You seem to know it well. So if someone who knows it so well tries to meddle in someone else's business with unnecessary meddling, the outcome won't be very good, will it? His voice was laced with a thick killing intent. This was a kind of warning. It was pressure telling him not to interfere or unnecessarily get involved in his affairs. Ordinary people would tremble in fear if warned with overwhelming strength. However, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio didn't reach this position for nothing, so he had some guts. Sang Ixio laughed as heartily as possible, trying to appear unaffected, and said, It seems I unintentionally offended you. But I'm not trying to interfere or get involved in your affairs. I was simply asking out of pure curiosity, since you've been frequently going back and forth to the underground prison, but it doesn't seem like things are going well. I absolutely haven't forgotten our agreement. Is that so? Then you should keep that pure curiosity to yourself. I've already kept it to myself. At his brazen response, the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander snorted. He was the only one who could walk the fine line and be cheeky every time he tried to intimidate him. Of course, it was also because he could control his emotions and had good political maneuvering skills that he had chosen him. Schwip. Soon, the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander's figure moved back to the chair at the table. He picked up the sword he had placed on the table and began polishing it diligently again. Seeing this, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio inwardly clicked his tongue. Although they had joined hands because their interests aligned, whenever he experienced this man's strength, he couldn't help but wonder about his true identity. There was no way someone like him hadn't made a name for himself in the martial world until now. Perhaps he had quite a reputation or notoriety in the martial world. Curiosity piqued. The corners of Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ixio's mouth twitched. He had never directly asked about this until now, but that man was always brimming with confidence, so he was curious. I'll get him to speak in a roundabout way. With that, Sang Ikyo opened his mouth. Previously, when you suggested bringing Thousand-Men Commander Ma Arehayan to our side, didn't you say he could sufficiently escape from the grasp of the Northern Pacification Commissioner? The Northern Pacification Commissioner of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, Hyan Soon. Although his fame was inferior to that of the Southern Pacification Commissioner, who was considered one of the Six Heavens, he was a top master ranked among the top 5 in the Imperial Palace. It was said that even if he didn't have much contact with the people of the martial world, with his level of martial arts, if he were to go out into the martial world, only the elders or leaders of famous martial clans or sects would be able to contend with him. He brought this up naturally because the one who was implicitly supporting and protecting this prince, Prince Zhang, was none other than the Northern Pacification Commissioner Hyan Soon. Shwip shwip. The Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander replied while polishing his sword. If they properly engage, it's uncertain, but if Ma Arehayan is determined to escape, even the Northern Pacification Commissioner would have a hard time catching him. Oh, is Ma Arehayan that formidable? With just his lightness skill, there aren't many in the Imperial Palace who could catch up to him. Amazing. To think that even the Northern Pacification Commissioner can't catch up to him, my. So unless there's a special mistake or unforeseen variable, it's unlikely that Ma Arehayan will be caught because of this incident. An unforeseen variable. Do you mean unless someone like you appears? No. Don't take it that way. I was just reminded of how you easily subdued him. He had witnessed the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander subdue Thousand-Men Commander Ma Arehayan right in front of him. It had been settled in just a few moves. At this question, the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander stopped polishing his sword and stared intently at Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikazio, saying, "What are you trying to say?" "No. Since you easily subdued Ma Arehayan, I was just thinking that if you were to step up later, you might be able to contend with the Northern Pacification Commissioner." "Is it perhaps difficult?" Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikazio deliberately pricked at his pride a little. Martial artists had a unique sense of pride as warriors. He wasn't sure if it would work on this man, but if he took the bait he might be able to gauge his level to some extent. At that moment, one of the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander's eyebrows raised. "Did I say something unnecessary?" Seeing that, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikazio flinched and considered slowly backing out. But then the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander opened his mouth. The expression contend is used when both sides have equal skills. Inwardly relieved, Sang Ikyo let out a sigh of relief. He had been worried that the man would read his intentions and be displeased, but fortunately, it seemed he had properly provoked his pride. "Then if you were to step up, you could sufficiently subdue the Northern Pacification Commissioner? It might take some time, but it's not a very difficult task." My. If you can subdue the Northern Pacification Commissioner, then even the Chief Eunuch of the Eastern Depot or the Chief Eunuch of the Inner Court Administration wouldn't be a match for you. At that moment, the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander's eyes sharpened. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Don't tell me you're asking these questions to gauge my martial arts right now?" At that question, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikazio hurriedly waved his hands and replied, "No. How could I try to gauge you with such a thing? I was just thinking that I need to know to what extent you can deal with top masters." Thud. Before he could even finish speaking, the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander rose from his seat. Then he extended one hand and used profound internal energy to suck the scabbard lying on the floor into his grasp. Sang Ikazio couldn't help but admire the skill of plucking an object from thin air. As if he had intended for this, the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander inserted the polished sword into the scabbard he had sucked into his hand. And then he said, "Let me make this clear." "What do you mean?" "Here in the Imperial Palace, the only one I can't handle is the Southern Pacification Commissioner alone. The Southern Pacification Commissioner, Gu Songbek. Known as the Northern Blade King, he was the pinnacle of the current martial world and one of the Six Heavens. Although the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-Men Commander Jiamchong had great confidence in his own martial arts, the only one he acknowledged as unapproachable in the Imperial Palace was none other than Gu Songbek, one of the Six Heavens. That's how insurmountable the wall of the Six Heavens was. However, other than that, he was confident that no one else in the Imperial Palace could be his match. That included the Northern Pacification Commissioner and the 3 chief eunuchs of the Inner Palace. So I hope there won't be any more attempts to gauge me with such trivial matters. Whoosh. With those words, the embroidered uniform Guard 100-men Commander Jiam Chong revealed his energy towards Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikisio. Sang Ikisio trembled at the suffocating aura. He could instinctively tell. This man was definitely a master of the transformation realm who had crossed the threshold. Just as he had boasted, there was absolutely no one in the Imperial Palace who could subdue him except for the Southern Pacification Commissioner Gu Songbek, who was known as the strongest master in the Imperial Palace. Thud. At that moment the door to the office suddenly opened. And someone entered with a smile on their face. Seeing that face, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-ho furrowed his brows and spoke. Lord Eunuch Ho? The one who had suddenly barged into his office was none other than the supervisor of the Western Depot, Chief Eunuch Ho. Sang Ik-ho couldn't hide his bewilderment at the unexpected appearance of this person. Outside the office, there were guards from the Imperial Guard standing watch. Yet not a single one of them reported that the supervisor of the Western Depot had come here, and they didn't even notice when he opened the door. Don't tell me he came here in secret? There was no other way he could have entered someone else's office so recklessly. Although he, someone with one of the top martial arts in the Imperial Palace, failed to detect the presence of Chief Eunuch Ho, the embroidered uniform Guard 100-men commander, no, Jiam Chong must have definitely noticed. Shwip. At that moment Jiam Chong's hand was already gripping the hilt of his sword. Seeing this, Sang Ik-ho's eyes flickered with surprise. That was because Jiam Chong, who had boasted that no one except the Southern Pacification Commissioner could be his match, was showing strong wariness towards the supervisor of the Western Depot. Is it because he suddenly barged in? But this wasn't the time for that. No matter how abruptly he had barged in, the other party was the supervisor of the Western Depot and a close confidant of Prince Jiongjin, one of the 4 powers in the Imperial Palace. He couldn't be treated carelessly. So Sang Ik-ho tried to make him back off. 100-men Commander Jiam. Put away your sword. Associate Military Commissioner. Step back. At Jiam Chong's words, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-ho furrowed his brows. Jiam Chong's attitude was odd. Since he had been in the Imperial Palace for quite some time, he should know who the person in front of him was, but his current appearance was revealing hostility beyond mere wariness. Thud. Jiam Chong even took a sword stance. Then in a low voice he spoke to Chief Eunuch Ho. Who the hell are you? Who are you? What kind of nonsense was this? Anyone could see that it was Chief Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot. Yet, ignoring Jiam Chong who had taken a sword stance towards him, Chief Eunuch Ho looked at Sang Ik-ho and opened his mouth. Judging by the command gu in your body, you must be the Associate Military Commissioner. At those completely unexpected words, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-ho's expression stiffened. The very instant he heard about the command gu, Jiam Chong, who had been gripping the sheath, moved his hand. It was so fast that it was like a flash. Ching. The moment he heard about the command gu, he judged the other party to be a definite enemy and tried to behead the person in front of him with a sword technique that had reached the pinnacle of swiftness. No, before the guy could even realize it, his sword would have already sliced through the guy's neck. Thud. Clang. At that moment something fell to the floor. It wasn't just one sound of something falling. Something was strange. Unconsciously, Jiam Chong's eyes turned downward. What had fallen to the floor was none other than his own right hand, which had been gripping the sword. Chapter 259, The Mark 6. Last night. Plop. Plop. Seeing the pieces of skin falling from Mok Jiongun's body, Chong Ryong was flabbergasted. She had guessed that absorbing some of the demonic power of Nine-Tailed Fox, one of the 6 demons closest to the divine beasts, would advance his energy when internalized. However, this wasn't just advancement. Mok Jiongun's body, his muscles and bones had once again reconstructed and evolved. Metamorphosis. 1. This was called metamorphosis. To think she would witness him achieve a second transformation right before her eyes. This wasn't simply about expelling impurities from the body. His body had transformed into the optimal state to handle that energy. Whoosh. The vast demonic energy emanating from Mok Jaeongun had already reached the pinnacle stage, surpassed the transformation realm. She herself had also crossed the threshold before her death. However, she had never crossed the threshold of thresholds or actually seen it. Thus, it was difficult to precisely judge the level Mok Jaeongun's energy had reached, but in terms of energy alone, wouldn't he be infinitely close to the profound realm? The profound realm. It referred to the realm beyond the threshold of thresholds. It was a realm surpassing the transformation realm, where controlling true energy was as natural as breathing, and it could be said to be the highest domain a martial artist could reach. However, what was incomprehensible was that Mok Jaeongun hadn't gained the enlightenment to cross the threshold of thresholds. Is rebirth possible without enlightenment? This was practically impossible. Yet how is this possible? Second transformation. Usually, energy that one couldn't handle would escape the body. There was a saying that too much was worse than too little. Thus, the body would release the excess energy that could become poison, regulating itself. However, Mok Jaeongun managed to internalize it all. Everything became his own. It's different from the concept of evolution. It's as if this guy's body is adapting to extreme situations. Ah, yes. That expression was fitting. His body was constantly adapting. That adaptability was so unbelievably high that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it had surpassed human limits. Clicking her tongue like that, Chong Ryong inwardly affirmed. With his current state, he could sufficiently contend with the 8 stars. The 6 heavens and 8 stars, known as the pinnacle of the current martial world. She was convinced that while Mok Jaeongun's martial power hadn't reached the 6 heavens yet, he could definitely match the 8 stars below them without being inferior. Thud. Clang. The right hand gripping the sword fell to the floor. Unconsciously seeing this, the eyes of the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander Jaeom Chong trembled. He had unleashed a sword technique that could be called extremely swift. Yet without even blinking an eye, that guy's wrist had been sliced off. Didn't he say no one could match him except the Southern Pacification Commissioner? It was ridiculous how this happened not long after he had said that. Of course, that didn't mean he thought Jaeom Chong was bluffing. Having actually witnessed his martial arts, he realized that the opponent was a tremendous monster. Just what is his true identity? Both his martial arts and his knowledge of the Command Gu's existence. When the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander Jaeom Chong first brought a pair of Gu poisons, he had said, "When this is settled inside the body, it doesn't harm the host at all. Rather, it survives on the impurities and waste in the organs, benefiting the body. It's peculiar for something called a Gu poison. That's the advantage of this. When it's inside the body, it doesn't harm the host, and after a certain period, the organs no longer recognize it as a foreign substance." What does that mean? Even though it's inside the body, if it's not recognized as a foreign substance, it means that whether it's a physician or whoever, they can't detect the existence of the Gu poison in the belly. Jaeom Chong had confidently asserted that no one could detect either the Gu poison or the Command Gu. He had stated that with such confidence, so how did this person find out? As the puzzled Jaeom Chong, whose right hand had been cut off, extended his left hand. Whoosh! Strong energy coalesced on his left hand, forming the shape of a blade. As a master of the transformation realm, he could freely control true energy like no other, so this wasn't a difficult task. Hover. Huff. Huff. He couldn't move recklessly, knowing that the opponent was no ordinary master. The fact that he had sliced off his wrist despite unleashing an extremely swift sword technique first clearly meant that the opponent was a step above him. At that moment, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikesio carefully opened his mouth. "Who are you?" At that question, the unknown person wearing the human skin mask of Chief Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot, smiled and replied, "As you can see, I'm Chief Eunuch Ho." Did he think they would believe that now? But the unknown person wearing Chief Eunuch Ho's human skin mask looked at Jaeom Chong, who had formed a sword stance and was ready to respond at any moment, and said, "You should have sufficiently recognized the difference by now." Huff. Huff. "If you want your remaining arm to stay intact, just step aside." At his arrogant attitude, Jaeom Chong gritted his teeth. It was infuriating, but someone with this level of martial arts had every right to say that to him. However, there were situations where one had to back down when the opponent was a step above, and there were situations where one didn't, and this was clearly the latter. Glancing sideways at the Associate Military Commissioner, Jiam Chong opened his mouth. Huff. I don't know your true identity, but since you mentioned the command Gu, you must be related to Thousand Men Commander Ma Are Hyan, right? Who knows? It was neither an affirmation nor a denial. However, even with this ambiguous answer, Jiam Chong could be certain of the relationship. Is that so? Then do you also know that if the host of the command Gu is in danger or their life is at risk, it can cause problems for both sides later on? Both sides. If the host dies, the command Gu also dies. In that case, the parasitic male command Gu inside the host also dies while harming the host. Do you understand what that means? It meant that Thousand Men Commander Ma Are Hyan, who was hosting the parasitic type, would also die. At this, Mok Jae-un showed no particular reaction. However, seeing his lack of response and the disappearance of his smile, it seemed he understood the implication. Here Jiam Chong spoke to drive his point home. It's best not to move. Even if threatened, it's also possible to kill the command Gu internally. If that happens, Ma Are Hyan dies too. Thinking he had gained the upper hand, Jiam Chong issued a warning. As if his threat had worked. The expression of the unknown person wearing Chief Eunuch Ho's human skin mask had stiffened quite a bit. His gaze had also lowered, but below. Where was he looking now? His gaze, which had been directed at Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo until just now, had suddenly shifted downward. It was towards the severed right hand lying on the floor. Why was he staring at that? While Jiam Chong was puzzled, the person wearing Chief Eunuch Ho's face, No Mok Jae-un, suddenly reached out his hand towards it. At that moment, whoosh. The right hand, No, the unique saber Jiam Chong's right hand had been gripping, the Lipyeongdo rose from the floor and was sucked into Mok Jae-un's hand. Why did he take his saber? As Jiam Chong was questioning this, Mok Jae-un, who had dropped the right hand gripping the saber, stared intently at the tip of the scabbard. Seeing this, Jiam Chong's eyes soon widened. No way. It was right then. Shwip. Mok Jae-un's figure vanished and suddenly reappeared behind Jiam Chong. Flinch. Fast. Jiam Chong, who had been focusing and on alert, was startled by the incredibly swift movement and hastily tried to launch his body forward to gain some distance. However, the moment he kicked off the floor, something sharp brushed past his left shoulder where he had formed a sword stance. It was none other than his unique saber, the Lipyeongdo. Soon, his severed left arm fell to the floor, and just as he was about to lose balance, Mok Jae-un grabbed his head and smashed his face into the floor. Bam. Ugh. It didn't end there. Still gripping his head, Mok Jae-un pushed his face towards the edge of the floor. Skid, skid, skid. The force was so brutal that a grotesque scream burst out from Jiam Chong's mouth as his face was completely torn off. Aakak. Crack. Squish. Crunch. His teeth were all broken and wooden splinters and stone fragments were embedded in his eyeballs. It was so painful that he felt like he would lose consciousness. As he was suffering like that, his hair was eventually pulled and his face was tilted upward. Eek. Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-ho was at a loss for words at the bloodied and horribly disfigured face. To think he would do this even after the warning, did he not care about Thousand Men Commander Ma Are Hyan's life at all? Then Mok Jae-un smiled so eerily that the corners of his mouth nearly reached his ears and spoke. I finally found it. At the tip of the scabbard held in Mok Jae-un's left hand, filled with exhilaration, was a strange pattern engraved. It was a mark identical to the scar left on his deceased grandfather.